音はすごい大きいかもしれないんで、これ言った方がいいかもしれないけど、ちょっと今言うとしてはあれだけど。
Shall I just
You speak to the mic,
yeah.
and then
test?
and then stop recording.
It's not recording. It's not recording. It's a bit annoying that it's on the speaker.
Shouldn't this be as
No.
expected?
No.
It was peaking just now. He changed the thing. Now peak. So nice. Nice.
It's gone.
Gone.
Okay.
Wow. Oh, it's coming. But the level doesn't come.
Yeah. Really internal.
Internal.
So which one should I use?
Wait. Still working it out. 今は出ないです。Right. Well, come back to.
Yeah. Okay.
これで一応入ってはいる。
Try again.
これは
No, it's not coming from there.
逆に触れてましたけど、急に触れなくなりました。
One more.
Yeah, we have 5 minutes. I will take it all out.
Yeah. Yeah, but okay.
A little bit lower. Or?
Maximum is good because it's an internal mic. Okay.
Good.
Mic is amazing, yeah. How do you disable it in software? Theoretically, you can code it out, but yeah. Now, okay.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for coming to IODE XXV Science Conference. And within 5 minutes, we will start the session. Please come in the meeting room.
Hello, good morning. At this occasion of this opening session of the scientific conference, I would like to give a short address to welcome all of you. It's my great honor and pleasure to be here as a co-chair of International Oceanographic Data and Information Exchange, which is one of the key programs of the IODE IOC, the UNESCO. First of all, I'd like to express my deep appreciation to Ms. Oyama, the Director General for the International Affairs of the MEXT, which stands for the Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, and Science Technology. And also she is the Secretary General for the Japanese National Commission for the UNESCO. Thank you very much for your presence despite your busy days. I also appreciate Dr. Vladimir Ryabinin, our Executive Secretary of the IOC, for your attendance and for your keynote regarding the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development after the opening session. I also like to thank you, the local host, JODC, Japan Ocean Data Center, particularly Mr. Yabuki, who is the director of JODC, and the IOD family, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to say that this is an epoch-making opportunity for Japanese ocean community to have such an event regarding oceanographic data and information management, because open data sharing and data and information management are both key components in promoting ocean policy in Japan. It is the first time for Japan to host the session of IODE. Although the Japan Ocean Data Center, JODC, has been keeping its high-level activities in this field since its establishment in 1965. I do believe this is the great opportunity for all of us to exchange views, ideas, and opinions to go together toward our sustainable planet. And in particular, successful and effective implementation of the UN Decade Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. I hope all the participants actively join the discussion for the next two days conference to be followed by the 25th session of the IODE. Finally, I'd like to thank all members of our excellent IODE team for their tireless preparation work for today. Then I will ask our leading co-chair, Dr. Cindy Chandler, to give us some words for opening. Cindy, now you have the floor.
Thank you, Yutaka. Good morning, everyone. Welcome. I think I'll start with thanking our hosts from Japan. This is a lot of work to host one of these meetings, especially it's really a double meeting with a two-day science conference followed by the IODE committee meeting. It's a lot of effort to put on something like this, and we really appreciate all of the work that's been done by the local staff here in Tokyo. For the next couple of days, we're going to hear some talks about the exciting research that's going on in the ocean science community, and also in particular, the efforts that all of you are doing to manage the data, which ultimately are the legacy of those oceanographic research programs. We often think about IODE as being a network of data centers and associate data units and marine libraries, but really it's a network of people all working together all over the world, cooperating and pooling our resources to try and achieve something that's much greater than any one of us could do alone. So with that, I'll just, one more little logistics thing. We have a very tight schedule. And so we're going to try and help the speakers stay on time today by holding up little cards. Claudia, do you have one of those or do we have them? So Vladimir, thank you for the assistance. We'll try and remember to give you a 2-minute warning when you have 2 minutes left in your allotted time. And then there's a stop sign, which we're hoping that you'll try and wrap up soon. We have a very tight schedule today, and we really would like to get all of these talks in. And with that, it is now my very great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Ms. Mami Oyama, who is the Assistant Minister, Director General for International Affairs, and also the Secretary General for the Japanese National Commission for UNESCO. She has a lot of work that she's in charge of. Ms. Oyama, please.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction, Dr. Chandler. So good morning, everybody. Co-chairs of the IODE, Dr. Chandler, Dr. Michida, Executive Secretary of the IOC, Dr. Ryabinin, Mr. Yabuki and Mr. Kato from Japan Coast Guard, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the Japanese National Commission for UNESCO, it is a real privilege for me to say a few words in greeting to you at this IODE scientific conference. Firstly, I would like to express my sincere appreciation to IODE communities for all your efforts in enhancing ocean research by facilitating the exchange of oceanographic data and information. Today, we are facing the global problems of climate change and the preservation of our ecosystems. In order to solve these urgent problems and realize sustainable societies, scientists and policymakers are tasked with developing appropriate countermeasures based upon scientific knowledge and implementing them in collaboration with all countries. Among these efforts, the field of ocean science is particularly important. The reasons are obvious. Oceans are the source of all life, connects all the continents, connects with all our daily lives, and is indispensable to the Earth itself. It's needless to say. And as you know, the conservation and sustainable management of oceans is set forth as SDG 14. And the UN General Assembly declared in 2017 a decade of ocean science for sustainable development, which will be held from 2021 to 2030. IOC UNESCO is the only UN organization for ocean science, and with the increasing importance of ocean science, there are increasing expectations for the role of IOC UNESCO. This is clear particularly in the light of the fact that utilizing the IOC framework enables cooperation and collaboration among nations. Together with Japanese researchers, the Japanese National Commission for UNESCO has been supporting the activities of the IOC for many years. The IODE is also a very important program for promoting the exchange of oceanographic data among member countries and enabling ocean research and sustainable management of oceans based upon the collaboration among countries. I wish to express my highest regards to all of you who have made such efforts for the IODE. Thank you very much. And I'm aware that at this scientific conference, participants will share the recent and new initiatives in ocean research, observation and services, as well as discussing how the IODE can contribute for achieving the sustainable development of oceans. I believe that all of you here today have been deeply involved in the efforts at the IODE and the IOC for many years and are very active at the front lines of ocean science. I am certain that the conference will see very meaningful and fruitful discussion towards the official launch of the decade based on your extensive knowledge. So the Japanese National Commission for UNESCO will continue our support to IOC activities and contribute to active discussions in planning process of the decade. So finally, I would like to express my sincere hope for the further development of ocean research and the continued success of your individual activities as well. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, let me start the conference. The objective of the conference is to provide an overview of the recent progress of the oceanographies, including the UN decade, And also we can give an opportunity to discuss about how can IODE contribute to the activities. So I will be the moderator of this first session, the UN Decade, team of the UN Decade. Before introducing our first speaker, I'd like to make an announcement regarding the kind of the housekeeping announcement. With regard to the lunch, you need to go downstairs, basement floor. There are so many restaurants. So please have your lunch outside of this room. And then, yes, and also we have only limited time available today. So please use your time very short, be short. Okay, first I'd like to introduce Dr. Vladimir Ryabinin, our Executive Secretary for the IOC. Here I talk about UN Decade, global overview of the UN Decade Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. So Vladimir, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Michida-san. Yutaka, I would like also to greet and thank the organizers and that also facilitated the conference and our presence here, Ms. Ayama, Mr. Kato, Mr. Yabuki, and of course co-chairs of IODE. So it's a great pleasure to be together with the family of IODE. And I was particularly touched when Yutaka Michida was announcing, he said, our executive secretary. That was really warm heartening for me. So, I would like now to try to engage you all in the decade of ocean science. And I think this is already something that is most important. We may believe that the decade of ocean science will be one of the largest scientific campaigns in earth sciences. So you see here the logo of the decade that we designed. So it's a great pleasure to speak about the decade, but it's much less pleasure to speak about the situation that happens in the ocean. Ocean is consuming more and more carbon. You will see, I will show by mouse. So more and more carbon is being consumed. Because of that, ocean is acidifying at a pace that is unprecedented and reaching some levels that have been observed in the past. They were quite dramatic. So sea level is rising, and thank you. Sea level is rising, and I would like also to say that in this part of the world, sea level is rising, particularly the tropical part of Pacific, rising faster than in other parts of the world. So we have now oxygen minimum zones and oxygen depleting zones. We have plastic in the ocean in different forms, and the amount of plastic is staggering. And of course, we have illegal fisheries that still is robbing like 25 billion US dollars annually, and also from the kind of normal fishery. So we are there to change that situation. Ocean needs our help. So we know that there are many assessments that review the state of the ocean. And I just wanted to highlight the nature of many of those assessments. That nature is basically to alarm the world about where the ocean is, what is the problem. But the amount of wisdom that goes into this alarming is also quite significant. But the number of solutions proposed to save the ocean is still limited. So I would like to highlight the first World Ocean Assessment. I would like to highlight also, of course, IPCC assessments, natural assessments, scientific assessments of polar region and cryosphere, and of course, the fishery assessments of Food and Agriculture Organization. So realizing that the ocean is in danger, and also realizing that the whole world, because of climate change, because of many other issues, is in danger, United Nations in 2015 started the Sustainable Development Agenda with 17 Sustainable Development Goals. And of course, this is a big achievement that we have ocean as Sustainable Development Goal 14 represented there. We have Sendai framework for disaster risk reduction that also started in 2015. And it is of particular importance for this country because of the tsunamis and earthquakes and that are quite frequent there. So we have conventions. For the first time in the Paris Agreement of United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the ocean was mentioned in terms of ecosystems. Of course, we also have Convention on Biological Diversity with targets accepted in Aichi target accepted in Japan. So what I would like to state here is that there are many frameworks in the ocean, in this, United Nations system, that are aimed to move forward the sustainability. But the nature of those conventions is aspirational. We don't yet have a legally binding convention on protection of the ocean. And on the United Nations Convention of Law of the Sea, UNCLOS, there is now an intergovernmental conference in which many countries that are represented here are very active and vocal. So this convention is going to come up, hopefully, with a legally binding regime on conservation and sustainable use of biodiversity beyond areas of natural jurisdiction. So if there is a legally binding convention, that the science of oceanography has also to be put on a different level. The data that we provide will be also meaning something legal, something binding. So this also is an element that we have to take into account in our considerations. But so far, as I said, these agreements are aspirational. And people who know what is happening in the ocean are uniting. So there was a big conference in 2017 on the ocean, on sustainable development goal, on protection of the ocean, on activities in the ocean. There are every year conference called Our Oceans, collecting voluntary commitments to save the ocean. Recently, in November last year, there was a conference on blue economy, and the idea is not just blue economy, but sustainable blue economy, just keeping the ocean able to provide the services. And of course, the group of countries that also, most developed countries, think about the ocean, and soon there will be a meeting, as you all know, of G20, and next month there will be a meeting of Science 20, also calling attention to the issues related to the ocean. People are uniting. There is a communities of ocean action that came from the ocean conference. We are leading in this 9 communities of ocean action, the community of ocean knowledge. There is a Friends of Ocean Action associated with World Economic Forum. And the United Nations, businesses are coming together because businesses are now, and private sector are guardians of sustainability. And of course, there is also an attempt to highlight to seek support from the highest level officials. So the high-level panel on sustainable blue economy that was organized, the Prime Minister of Norway has 13 heads of state or government participating in saving the ocean. So there is huge momentum there. We celebrate days. We have World Oceans Day, World Tsunami Awareness Day, now a day of fight against illegal, unreported, and regulated fishing. So we're trying to unite the society behind the need to save the ocean. But the reality is quite grim. So despite we have Paris Climate Agreement, the emissions of carbon continue to grow. And so the year 2018, according to World Meteorological Organization, was the year of the highest anthropogenic emission of carbon. And the scenarios that we have, at least my own personal and informal view, may result in this development. So the world may be much warmer than we would like it to be. And this is really a warning, really warning sign for us. So when it comes to money, a lot of money is generated in the domain of blue economy or of ocean economy. So according to the Worldwide Fund estimation, in 2015, it was 2.5 trillion of US dollars annually. OECD, Organization of Economic Cooperation and Development, assesses this value as 3 trillion by the year 2030. So this is, and the ocean economy is like a seventh economy in the world if compared with GDP, global gross domestic product of countries. But if you look at the ocean observations, that IOC is the leading coordinator and leading sponsor. So this is a system that is developing as well, and it was $1 billion per year. So it's 3,000 times less than the value of the money that is supported to some extent by the system. And IOC is able to invest in the coordination of the system $300,000. So again, 3,000 times less. So, you know, we under-observe the ocean in terms of how much we can invest into this, and we under-coordinate the ocean when it comes to our ability to invest into coordination mechanisms of that. So if we look at the Global Ocean Science Report that IOC published in 2017, it was unveiled at that big ocean conference in New York. So we analyzed the structure and infrastructure and resources available to oceanography and also productivity. This is the picture of the world that shows the number of publications. Of course, we have to measure the capacity of science probably in different ways, but if the only way for us to measure was in terms of peer-reviewed publications. And if there are more publications focused on oceanography, then the country area is increasing here in this graph. And you will see that there are centers of ocean sciences. I would like to mention 3 centers. This is basically North America, this is Europe, and this is Asia, and of course with Japan also, and Australia, Japan leading. Of course, there are other some centers, but you will see no Africa in this world. Africa depends on the ocean, but the capacity of African scientists to produce and also science and also to benefit from advances in science is very limited. So that's the situation in oceanography. So we have to think about this. Situation is, to some extent, like it was in the climate domain in 2008, when science was already there, but there was no action by governments. So this triggered some report of University College London in terms of how we can organize thinking about the science so that it would lead to decisions. And one of the ideas was the social contract for climate science, which I think has to be expanded to all natural sciences, including oceanography. So we can state that our science still remains voluntary, despite it's now starting to support legally binding decisions. So in this under-resourced, the governance needs to be stronger. And of course, capacity of the science is uneven when we think about geography and where the science is delivered. So, and again, as I said, when I was presenting to you the assessments, it is quite good when it comes to capacity to highlight issues, but our ability to propose solutions is still weak. So we need to mainstream the science, and that would be, I think, the social contract for such organizations like IOC. So we proposed to United Nations in 2017, and we developed the idea of a decade of ocean science 2016, and then we proposed this idea to the United Nations under the title, The Ocean We Need for the Future We Want. So this was a very serious proposal. It was very seriously discussed by the United Nations General Assembly, and it was approved. So decade was proclaimed. So we, since then, have developed a roadmap that many of you know. We moved forward from this idea of ocean we need also to the idea of the science we need for the ocean we want. And we would like to engage now everyone in the decade of ocean science. The idea here is not an IOC decade. It's United Nations decade of ocean science, but it's even beyond that. It's your decade. It's your once in the professional lifetime chance to make difference in oceanography. And of course, data is at the center of that. So when it comes to expected societal outcomes of the decade, we would like the ocean to be clean, pollution removed from the ocean to be healthy, that requires management of science-based management of ecosystems. We would like to have, of course, ocean productive, and this also means sustainability, productive in the long sense. We'd like also to have ocean safe. That would be coming, referring the needs to predict tsunamis and other tropical cyclones related to the temperature of the surface layer of the ocean. So indeed, to predict the ocean. And then I highlighted in a little bit different color the words transparent and accessible ocean. For us, this is the way to highlight the importance of having open and free access to ocean data. So that is most important for us. In that sense, the ocean has to be transparent, and this will also lead to transparency of decisions related to the ocean and to sustainable development. So to cut the long story short, we are working very hard on designing the decade. Unlike many other campaigns in social sciences and or environmental sciences, we would like this decade to be really designed, not completely top-down, but with strong design element. So we think that there must be some breakthroughs achieved in science, in ocean science, and then these breakthroughs will lead to changes in the capacity of those who are involved in social applications to achieve their goals. So we would like to really, for the first time in history, to have the map of the ocean topography completed by the year 2030. So we do this with the JEPCA community and also with the support of the SEABA 2030 project, with support of Nippon Foundation to the JEPCA community. But this is much more than just the map of the ocean depths. We have to map resources, we have to map ecosystems, so it has to be really digital atlas of the ocean. So that is a super challenge. This, of course, relates to data. Then we have to complete the observing system. Observing system is already quite acceptable in terms of physical domain, where we can use Argo floats, satellites, and Argo floats going to the depths of 2,000 meters. But it's still weak in the polar regions, and still in the domain of pilots or design mode for biogeochemical, biological, and ecological variables. We don't know really how ecosystems function. This is particularly true for bottom ecosystems. So we are really engaging the ecosystem community to understand how physics, biology, and sociology work in for example, 66 large marine ecosystems. But you know that the global ocean observing system produces certain essential ocean variables. Are these the variables that management of ecosystem requires? I think they're converging, but still there is a long way to go to understand how the ecosystem function and to be able to manage the ecosystems. I won't speak about data, I'll speak about that later. Of course, multi-hazard early warning systems. Last year, there were 2 tsunamis in Indonesia with more than 2,000 deaths of people. So they were just not related to the earthquakes, but also to some other factors, apparently, including collapse of volcano or submarine landslides. So the warning was not delivered. It was possible to deliver warning on the first occasion, but it didn't reach the audience. So you know we still need to do much more. And the approach using multi-hazard warning systems, for example, that the World Meteorological Organization is trying now to coordinate and to get information to civil protection is important. So we have to do a lot to make sure that the last mile of warning is reached. So now, of course, we cannot look at the ocean in isolation, because ocean is a part of a climate system, is a part of the Earth system modeling. That also involves economic sciences, social sciences, has to be developed, and the ocean has to be, oceanography has to be a strong component of that look at the Earth from the scientific viewpoint. And of course, this is only possible if the public decision makers, governments, private sector, and of course kids are knowledgeable about the ocean. So we try to develop the concept of ocean literacy. And of course, you saw the uneven character of capacity inside. This also comes to the need to strongly develop capacity in oceanography and ocean sciences. So if we achieve progress in this, and we have to be really proactive in doing this, then our capacity to do coastal zone management, maritime spatial planning, and also we'll be able much better to contribute to domains of adaptation and mitigation of climate change, to management of fisheries, to have better policies. So, but for that, we have to convey requirements and also resources from those domains that generate value and generate policies. We have to convey this information and resources to the science, and science has to inform that. It has to be a process. We hope very much this process will be designed, and this means communication between different communities. And this is where the IODE comes in, the idea of ocean data information system. With right now, we just think of a list of sources of data, repository of sources, but I think we have the capacity with the pedigree that exists and the knowledge that exists in this community, with databases, your approaches, your standardization, and also your capacity and also mandate to do more in the domain of exchange of data. I think we can move forward with the basis of what we have and turn IODE into the guardian of the future, united global portal of ocean data. So this will be meaning communication through data with certain breakthroughs that we anticipate with the ocean, the Atlas, Global Ocean Observing System, for ecosystems and some other elements like multi-hazard early warning systems, also enabling capacity, and also the applications that are already outlined. So IODE can be at the heart of this development. We need partners for this. We need your commitment to this. And I think with that, it will give us a chance to develop policy that will be dedicated data policy, that will be freer and more open and more observed by partners in the domain of oceanography, because we really need to open the domain of ocean data to users. But we cannot just impose that, we have to develop this, that's the idea. So with that, I would like now to close my presentation. Arigato gozaimasu. This is very, I think, important for us to deliver, because it's not only our job, it's not our bread and butter. I think we are now serving existential issues of importance for the whole planet and also for the ocean. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vladimir. With regard to the question and discussion, we have some kind of time slot after Julian's presentation. The same of this style, all of the presentation, with regard to the discussion, we have time at the end of each block. Okay, next speaker, I'd like to introduce Dr. Julian Barbier, the head of the section of the marine policy and regional implementation at the IOC headquarters. So he's talking about the decade and the UN partners. So if you are ready, please go ahead, Julian.
Apologies, we're doing a last-minute shortcut.
Should I set up the camera?
Yes.
Just to make sure your picture perfect.
We're ready to start, okay?
Great, thank you, Claudia. Thank you very much, and sorry about this slight delay. So I'm Julian Barbier, Head of Marine Policy, and I'm going to continue the presentation in a way that Vladimir initiated on the decade, with a little bit more of a focus on how we create this partnership, and particularly in the context of data and data supporting sustainable development policies of our member states. So I'm going to start with the slides that I think Vladimir finished with, which describes very much the importance of delivering a number of scientific breakthroughs, which of course is a key endeavor of this decade. But I think I just want to highlight here the transformative nature of what we are trying to do here for this decade. Because transformation is really required in the way society recognizes and reuses scientific informations, whether it's in terms of informing citizens about the health of the ocean, to inform business operations and operators that are active in the marine environment, or in supporting decision makers. It's also transformative in the way technologies can be used to understand the human impacts on the Earth systems, and the way we are developing this science policy dialogue at various levels. And of course, throughout that process, the importance of data and information is really the nerve of all of our activities here, and a key element in the work of a decade. And in a way, what we are trying to do in this framework is to support the scientific enterprise in terms of delivering science to policy. And to do that, the decade is really about establishing a dialogue between the scientists and the policymakers. We have, of course, the Agenda 2030, which has been, which is a major framework, and the decade is really, the difference is not just science for science, but science for sustainable development. So it's really about establishing a strong research collaborations. It's about synthesizing existing research. It's about co-designing research strategies with the inputs of stakeholders and decision makers. It's about conducting this research in cooperation across various basins. It's about synthesizing and assessing results and developing data products, for example, that can really inform and bridge science and policy. And of course, all of this will require funding, partnerships. It will require the engagement of stakeholders. It requires the integration of natural and social sciences. And as mentioned by Vladimir, capacity development is also a core requirement to ensure that nobody is left behind when we implement this decade. And again, data and information is really at the core of this enterprise, and I think will be a key element of the work ahead of us. Now, if we look at the different research and development priority areas that have been described, and Vladimir already alluded to some of them, the mapping of a digital atlas, the ecosystem knowledge, particularly focusing on understanding of cumulative stressors, and so on. All of these have, in a way, a strong data and information component in itself. But I think we also have identified data and information as a potential flagship initiative under the decade, where we could really develop a strong partnership in order to deliver this, particularly this outcome, which has been mentioned, of transparent and accessible ocean. And we have a roadmap which was presented to the IOC Executive Council last year. And in there, it already identifies some potential activities under each of those research and development areas. But of course, those are not finalized, and they require enrichment by various communities. And this is why we are also developing this preparation phase to really engage and receive these contributions from various communities in terms of defining what are their needs, what are the the type of science we want to develop and for what purposes. So in this roadmap document, there is a description particularly that it identifies the need for a dedicated information and data portal, which would really provide a core mechanism for organizing and disseminating data and information produced across the decade portfolio of activities. And in there, you can already see a number of principles that have been identified. We want this to be very much an open access mechanism. We want this data and information portal to support the advancements across scientific disciplines. The importance of integrating social science and human dimensions, and I mentioned earlier. The very direct contributions to sustainable development applications, whether we are talking about delivering and providing information that can support blue economy or informing the status of ocean health. It also mentions the role of private sector that could be a beneficiary and contributors. So here we need to start thinking about what kind of partnerships we want to put in place to deliver and engage with the private sector. We also need to look at how new technologies, particularly artificial intelligence, but over big data applications can be applied and translated into deliverables in this context. We need to address the issue of equitable access and benefits for developing nations. This is, again, a very important when we look that we see that many countries are lacking the basic facilities for just accessing internet, for example. And of course, this requires developing standards and interoperability of data and information products. And all of this needs to be looked at in the context of an impact that we are trying to deliver, whether it's in terms of helping to solve scientific questions and addressing societal needs, or to contribute to the improvement of management of marine resources. We also need to look at the feasibility aspects. We need this information and data provided that needs to be scientifically credible. We need this to be technically practical, cost-effective, and of course, enduring. And then we need to think about the legacy. This is a very important question that we need to start addressing now, not at the end of a decade. If you look at initiatives such as the Census of Marine Life, which left us this great present, which is the Ocean Biogeographic Information System. This is a core program which needs to be tailored and supporting the policy needs. So we need to think about some of these issues in the design stage and not just in the implementation or at the end. And then we need to think about data for what? Scientific data that we anticipate to be generated by the decade is needed to inform the policy process, the business operations, the interests of civil society. And it's really trying to see how we can package this in different clusters, from understanding the global and more localized drivers of the state of the marine environment, but also understanding the status of ecosystems, whether we're talking about marine biodiversity or the societal benefits that are being derived from the marine environment. And then it's also about delivering on solutions that may, for example, include the identifications of scenarios that can be supported by innovative ocean prediction models. And of course, all of this information and data are required at different scales because many of those problems have a different spatial dimension. Some of those are more focused on the global aspects, and we need to understand how those are interlinked at different scales as well. So if we talk about supporting the integrated management of the ocean, I guess we can then say that we probably need integrated data to do this. And we need to develop a number of additional attributes so that the data and information can be used to help us and can be better integrated. And we can think about how to share this data in a more easily and user-friendly way. We need to improve the traceability of the data. We need to develop interoperability of spatial data sets and services. We want this to be multi-stakeholder focused, so different type of users will derive different services and will access different products. We want this to be in a networked environment where you will be able to discover across fields, will be able to view and download the information and the data. For that, we need, of course, data and service sharing, and we need to define the protocols for doing this. We also need stakeholders to be able to customize the information and the data they are deriving. And of course, we have many challenges. We can try, and I guess you know this more than me. You are the data people. I'm just a policy guy talking about data. But we have, of course, the issue of diversity of data and sources and formats that in the majority of cases makes it very difficult to create intercomparison between different data sets. So we need to go from this challenge and really try to move into a more user-friendly environment where we have data which is interoperable and where data users can derive different type of products depending on the needs. So let me step back a little bit now from the data aspect, well, still a little bit on the data really, but and look at how can we use the decade, and in particularly the Agenda 2030, to try to harness and develop a partnership specifically focusing on ocean data. We have the SDGs, we have SDG 14, and we have a number of international organizations which are collecting data on the implementation of the SDGs, looking at various dimensions, whether those are focusing on stress indicators of marine pollution, of overexploitation of fisheries, looking at the status of habitats. For example, we have UNEP, which is documenting different type of marine and coastal ecosystems, mangroves, coral reefs. We have the FAO, who's keeping count on stock assessments and developing regional database, which really create information about the status of fisheries. So there is, and this is just the international organizations. Of course, these data are very much also shared and owned at different other levels. But I think there is a real potential to use the decade and the SDG to try to come up with a global discussion on how we can harmonize and make this data far more interoperable and far more powerful in the way we are helping to describe the connections, the interconnectivity of our marine environment. For example, looking at the impacts of climate change on fisheries. I mean, we have a lot of data on the state of the ocean, on physical aspects, on ocean acidification. How are we combining this with the status of fisheries stocks and aquaculture at the coastal level? Those are, I think, questions we need to address. Now, I mentioned that the data is very much dispersed around, and it's sitting in various type of organizations, whether it's governmental agencies, the private sector, academia, research infrastructures, and I mentioned, of course, the international organizations. And in a way, we already have maybe a first step in the right direction, and that's ODES. And ODES, Vladimir mentioned that earlier, and we will, I guess, in the course of this week, hear a lot about ODES and its ambition. But I think it's maybe a basis, a foundation for developing this kind of mapping of where the data sits. Now, of course, so far, I think we're talking about different type of organizations who are contributing to ODES, but we need to expand that to other organizations, and I think we need a strategy to do that. Also want to mention big data, because, I mean, clearly everybody is talking about big data, so we need to start to think how we can use this untapped potential in the context of marine environment. Some estimates that 90% of the data in the world has been created in the last 2 years, and it's projected to increase by 40% annually. So in a way, big data can really complement official statistics and other type of data by adding depth and nuance to information on human behaviors and experiences. We have new sources of data, we have new technologies, and if applied in a responsible way, we could enable more agile and efficient evidence-based decision-making that can better measure progress. We, of course, need to be very conscious about the risks and the challenges, the issue of privacy, of ethics, or data sovereignty, as well as the growing inequality and bias in the use of big data. So again, this is something, I'm not giving you an answer here, I'm just raising the question, and I think a lot of those big data also implies some level of partnerships with the private sector. So we need to think about the kind of partnership model we want to put in place with the private sector to operationalize this concept. There's a concept of data philanthropy, for example. Is this something that we could try to promote in the context of a decade? Those are questions that I think we can think about in the course of this week. Now let me step back and we talked about data, I talked about different stakeholders who have an interest in data, both in terms of contributors and users. I want to give you a bit of an overview of how we're trying to engage at the whole level of a decade. And of course, the first step is really to try to identify who we need to engage. And we have identified a number of groups of stakeholders that we want to be involved. And of course, we're talking about the ocean science and technology community. I mean, clearly, we need to start with this group, because those can formulate priorities, advances, and align the agenda for global ocean science. We want the ocean policy and sustainable development who can help and drive the development of solutions to ocean sustainability challenges. And in there, of course, we have different levels. We have national level, we have the regional and organizations, we have UN bodies who have the responsibility for managing specific ocean sectors. We want the business and industry involved because they can access tools and information required to find solutions. They can invest in the blue economy and invest in research and development. We want donors in foundation because we need, of course, to create partnerships, and we need to align and leverage the investment that those organizations are putting into ocean research. So those are some of the examples of stakeholders that we have identified. And of course, we've started a mapping process to really trying to understand at a much more granular scale what type of organizations are contained within these big categories. And the idea is to try to also see which ones are the most relevant to engage with, because it's difficult to start with everybody. So we need to be strategic, and we need to look at the more influential ones and the ones who can leverage their own networks and communities in the work of a decade. And in doing this, we of course need to understand what are the motivations of stakeholders to engage, because they are very much different. Some organizations are focusing on advancing knowledge. Some other ones want to create new collaborations. They want to translate research into policy. Others want to have an economic growth and commercial opportunities, and so on. And then their contribution is also very, may differ from people, from expertise, from technology development, from the provision of research infrastructures. And I need to hurry up. So to understand this interest and these potential contributions, we've put in place a pretty exhaustive process for consultation in this preparatory phase. We have 2 years. By 2020, we need to deliver an implementation plan for the decade, and which will be considered by the UN General Assembly. And this plan needs to be pretty detailed in terms of defining the objectives, defining the different decade portfolio and programs. It should have a capacity development plan. It should have a monitoring and reporting component, because clearly this is a plan that will be updated in the course of a decade. We're not going for a static plan and 2020, and then we revisit in 2030 and see what happened. This is something that will need to be inbuilt. So we will need to have every 2 to 3 years a review of this plan. And to get to that plan, we have established an executive planning group, and there is at least a couple of members who are here with us in the room. This is a group of 20 experts, and which is acting as an advisory body to the IOC Secretariat. And we had our first meeting in December, so we are advancing now with in getting guidance from this group. We have also a number of global and regional workshops to try to flesh out in these different research and development areas that I mentioned earlier, and to do this through stakeholder engagement in discussions, and as well as a stakeholder forum where we can have institutional interest being represented and providing feedback in the development of the implementation plan. And of course, we need the other UN bodies involved in this work. UN Oceans is identified as a key player in facilitating also the implementation of a decade in the other fora, UN fora. And of course, this is something that we started to do. So we have a pretty busy timeline, as you may expect, between now and 2020. We have a number of global meetings, and the first global planning meeting, which will happen in May this year. And then this will be followed by a number of regional workshops to really try to understand what are the needs at the regional level, what are the priority areas, what are the existing building blocks that we can build on, but also to try to identify what kind of data products, for example, our communities want. So I'm getting there. So this is just an overview of what those different workshops are supposed to achieve. And of course, the first global planning meeting I mentioned will take place in Copenhagen, so you can write down this date, because we also anticipate and would like to see many of the IOD communities represented at this meeting. And of course, we need to do this in partnership. I just want to highlight that IOC cannot do it all by itself, and it's very important that we join hands with other regional organizations, both in the organization of these regional workshops, but also in having them identify their own contributions. Just want to highlight that, for example, for the Westpac and Pisces region, we have defined that we will have a regional workshop at the end of July here in Tokyo, and this has been facilitated thanks to the support of a Japanese government. So I'm getting there. This is my last slide. Oops, no. Well, here we go. Or maybe just, can I say a few words there? Okay. So I think this is a very ambitious work that we have ahead of us. And of course, our challenge would be to meet the growing range of societal demands to achieve SDG 14. And this can only be done by realizing all the elements of the ocean value chain and ensuring that those are resourced adequately and more integrated science agendas are advanced. And to do this, of course, we need global capacity building and resource sharing between countries. We need to deliver data and information to support the integrated research, governmental actions, the work of the private sector and the public interest. We need to build on new technologies to improve ocean observations. And we need to make use of a digital revolution to transform ocean science and the delivery of information to where it is most needed. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Julian. We are ready for the question and discussion. If you, for Japanese participants, if you like to use Japanese language, it's okay. Maybe the Vladimir and Julian, it's better for you to have your receiver for the interpretation. Okay, both of the talks, they emphasize the importance of the data and information management, and also the open data sharing for the successful implementation of the UN Decade Ocean Science of Sustainable Development. So I think this is a very unique and very excellent opportunity for us to discuss directly with our executive secretary and also the officers or secretariat in charge of the decade preparation. So, is there any questions? Yes, Helen first. And then Tani-san.
Thank you very much. Thank you so much for very informative talks about the upcoming ocean decade. I would like to ask, what is the vision for the aspect that Julian talked about? How could we move forward or move towards a more unrestricted use of the information and data that might come as a result of the ocean decade?
So, if you don't mind, Julian, I will start.
Well, let me clarify just a little bit. It's just that I think that access to data sometimes might not translate in use of the data, and so I was wondering if that would be part of the discussion in the framework.
Thank you, Hernan. And in principle, if you remember the slide that was shown in Julian's and my presentation, that was the slide that was connecting breakthroughs, including the data breakthrough and societal applications. So we hope that during the decade it will be possible to enable societal applications in the areas that are supported by those types of science, and it is the data that is cross-cutting element that is going to facilitate that development. So actually it is your community also that need to be expanded, and that would be looking really outward, that would start working and then create the real pool for data. So people would really understand that there is something is possible, that data is required, that data needs to be generated through the observations and science and also modeling, and then there is this demand for the data. And then if the societal benefit from those data is so high that it will be really difficult to stop the data. So I would like to say that one key performance indicators, at least for me, and when I was answering one of the questions at the IODE Management Committee, would be that by the end of the decade, it will be much more advantageous to share data and benefit the society in terms of societal than to sit on data. Then I think it will be successful in that particular element of the decade. Julian.
Oh, I think I agree. I think it's really creating an environment and for incentives that will, facilitate the exchange of data amongst the different stakeholders that will take part in the work of a decade. So I think it's defining maybe a number of principles that we will require your assistance to develop, because you have the expertise in doing that, and particularly when we think about also the issue of interoperability. So I think this is a work ahead. How we do this, that's also a good question. I mean, is the IOD the right route to do this? Do we need a more specific dialogue established? We have a global planning meeting that will take place in Copenhagen. This is, I think, a place where we can start to get some guidance in terms of aspects of data and exchange. So I think this is something we need to bring to that meeting as well.
Okay, thank you. We'll move to the next one, the Dr. Tani. Yes.
Thank you, Taka. I'm Shintani, Chair of GEVCO Guiding Committee, and thank you for your great presentation, comprehensive and cleverly composed. And I have a question to both of you. Vladimir, you mentioned the digital atlas, which will come probably after CBET 2030, which you mentioned. And what do you envisage in that digital atlas, which was also touched upon by Julian? What kind of, because I think the digital atlas of the ocean is the final goal or ultimate target of this group, IODE, and of course the basis will be CBET 2030 or GEVCO. And what do you envisage for that idea of the digital atlas?
So who's first? Yeah, resume first. Yes.
All right. Thank you very much, Tani-san. Good to see you. We really would like to complete for the first the JEPCA. We would like to complete the map of the ocean topography at the resolution that is meaningful for the applications. And that is already quite well defined and will be further defined. And I think the new grid of JEPCA is going to come soon. But we need to think, as you indicated, farther than that. And basically, we live in the digital world. And so we would like to have all the information about the ocean to be standardized, geo-referenced, and presented to the world in compatible and meaningful way. So we don't have yet completely finished the map of ocean ecosystems. In order to develop resources on the bottom, we need also conserve resources of the bottom of the ocean. We would like to have a map that everyone would know. So also, to some extent, there is a possibility of a maritime spatial planning is also a map of the ocean that is decided locally, but in principle, such information will be useful for other elements. So we would like to digitize and open to the world the totality of the ocean knowledge. And why we call it map? Because it's to some extent static map. On top of that static map, we would like to have maps of changing parameters of the ocean also included. So that would be basically expansion of all the data sets in the geographical way to the world. So this requires not only just intention, but also I think this is a new science problem. Google changed the world in how ocean data and how environmental data has been represented, but we, I think, also need to design how we can see that map or atlas of the world in all oceanographic applications, not only referring to what Google can do for us, but also move forward in this professional manner and look at all communities and see what we can do together with them to open that domain of data.
Thank you. I think the idea is very important for ocean policy making and also for our future. Thank you very much for your proposal.
Thank you very much. And actually, I would like also to continue and just for one sentence and say that this is a science problem that probably requires a big conference and big project developing common understanding and approaches.
Thank you very much. And before taking the next one, I'd like to ask Cindy, you have some response to that, yeah?
Thank you for that presentation. I always learn something when you talk about the UN decade, so that well done again. You both alluded to the transformative, what you expect to be the transformative nature of the UN decade, specifically that it has a framework that fosters flagship projects with research strategies that result in both science breakthroughs and the societal applications. That I agree, that will be very transformative if that actually happens. My question is, for the most part, the research communities that are involved in generating those kind of results are separate, they're distinct. They don't often work together and they speak different, they have different vocabularies. And so you don't often see them collaborating on projects. So I'm wondering, they have different priorities, they have different motivations for the research that they do. But I agree, the fact that those communities come together and work toward common goals is going to be very essential for the success of the decade. You mentioned, Julian, in your talk, the plans for the stakeholder forums and the regional workshops. I'm wondering if you've thought of other ways that you're going to encourage those communities to find each other and develop those common vocabularies to work toward, if not common goals, at least generating the results in a way that they can support each other's outcomes. Yep.
Thanks, Cindy. Yeah, I mean, this is definitely an ambition of a decade, but of course a challenge as well, because we know the reality. And that's why, in a way, we're also trying to organize the discussion, not by scientific fields or even by scientific activities, but try to start from the kind of mission-oriented approach of a decade by looking at what it is we want to support, and we identify a number of societal outcomes. And I think this is a strategy, whether it's going to work, we hope it's going to work, but that we are going to structure a lot of those meetings using this as a starting point and the kind of policy demand for delivering information in support of those areas. And then really get the dialogue going across with scientific communities on the delivery of those specific goals. So we have regional workshops, we have global meetings, we also anticipate communities to self-organize themselves as well. And for that, we are discussing with a number of international research organizations, with Future Earth. We are also engaging in the work of a decade. But I think it's really a call for the communities to self-organize themselves. But of course, this needs to be linked with the policy dimension and application side of things. So it's a challenge, but I think we can try to deliver on it.
Okay, thank you. So the time of discussion is over now. So thank you very much for the two speakers. And this is actually a very good opportunity for us to discuss about the preparation of the UN decade. Thank you very much. And now we take a break for 30 minutes. And please come back here by 10:11 sharp, Oh yeah, yes, I had an announcement regarding the posters and demos. The posters are available on the foyer and also the room C, and also 3 demo are also going in room C, I guess, for ODIS, OTGA, and ORBIS, 3 demonstrations. So you are encouraged to come to see the demo and also the poster.